Welcome back to the TownNerd channel. Today we're going to be continuing our Java basic programming tutorial series. This should be episode 6. Today we're going to go over functions and methods. We'll go over how to write them, why they're useful, what they do to improve code, and then also at the end we'll go over some one or two coding projects you can do on yourself, very small exercises to test the what you've learned in this episode. So first off, what is a method and why do we use them? So a method is a reusable block of code that performs a specific task. So that definition is very important, meaning perform a specific task. You don't want functions and methods that do a lot of different things because it makes it hard to read, hard to follow, hard to debug. It makes it harder for new people who are coming onto the project to understand what the project is doing. So you want to keep your methods very simple, or at least as simple as possible in the context of your project. So first we'll go over the syntax and like how to write a method. So here, this main method that gets started or gets provided to you if you check that box to where it autofills this. This is a method. It's a method that's automatically called when you run a Java program. But it will run everything inside these curly braces whenever you run that method. So how you create one is by providing the access modifier, so public. This could be private or protected. We'll go over those later. But in this instance, for the main method, it has to be public. Then this void here is a return type. So it's the type of object that this method is going to return. But void means nothing, so this method isn't returning anything. We're not expecting this method to return any type of object. This static is an additional modifier you can add that makes this method one of a kind and accessible from anywhere in the project. So being that this is the main method, it's necessary. And then next here we have a parameter. So these are things that are going to be passed into the method. Things that you provide the method that is then accessible from within the method. And these will come from different places depending on what your method's doing. So in here we're passing an array which is defined by these two brackets. We'll get into arrays in more detail in a later episode. But this is a type string, so an array of string objects, and the name is args, and this is something that the main method will have access to, but we're not going to use that in this context for this example. So we'll go on to writing our first method, and it'll just be a simple one. So static void greet. Did I spell that right? Yeah. Greet. And then you also always have these parentheses here, even if you don't have any parameters. So in this aspect here, we have a parameter inside these parentheses, but we're making a function here. It doesn't have any parameters. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me remove this. You can't write methods inside another method, so that was my bad. I was inside the main method when I really needed to be creating it after the main method as its own separate method. So here we have static void greet. So this is a static method we've created that means it's accessible anywhere in the project. Void, this is not returning anything to where it's called from. The name is greet. It takes in no parameters, so just empty parentheses here, and then an open and closed curly brace. Then now we're going to define the method. So inside of this method, we're just going to have one line that says system.out.println string hello, welcome to the function world. So we'll get rid of this white space here. when you create a method, you want it to be readable and then also spacing things properly. So in this instance, we only have one line, so we don't need like a space before and after this line to separate it out from anything else happening inside this method. So all this method is doing, when it gets called, it's going to run this one line of code, which is going to output this string we've entered into the console, just like we've used the system.out.print function before in our other exercises. Now, to call this method, you do it inside any other method. So you can call methods from other methods, but you cannot define a method inside another method. So in our main method, this is the one that gets ran anytime we click the run button, anytime you run this Java class file, it will call the main method. So here we just call greet. We provide the parentheses because even though we're not passing any parameters, it's still a function. Function calls are defined by them having parentheses. And then the semicolon to end this line in the code. So here we'll put method invocation. So right here in this main method, we are invoking this method greet to be ran later. And here we will do method declaration. Alright, and now we can run this program. And we see hello, welcome to the function world gets printed in the console, just as we'd expect if we had written this line in the main method. Instead, we're doing that in a separate method that all its job is to do is to print the string. So we've talked a little bit about the parameters. We've mentioned parameters, or arguments is another thing you can call them, which is what this is what you define inside the parentheses after you declare a method. So when you do that, it means when you call this method, you have to provide those parameters and arguments inside the parentheses here. In this way, the function is meant to run with those parameters. If it doesn't have those parameters, then you're missing some key element in the method that's required. So if you make a method and it has a parameter that's not used in the method, you need to remove it because it's not doing anything, it's not being used, therefore it shouldn't be provided when you call that method. So we'll write another method that will actually take in some parameters. So here we'll do another static void greet user, and this will take in a string called user, and that is going to be a parameter we use inside this method that is getting passed when the method is called. It's not a value we already have inside of this method. So another very simple method here is just going to be another system.out. But in this time, we will say hello, and then a plus user plus exclamation mark. So, and actually, let me just refer this to name instead of user. The method is called greetUser, but what we will provide is the name of the user in this case, just to make it more readable and more understandable. And we've seen this syntax before. When providing a string, you can do what's called concatenation, which is using this plus sign, which is adding an object into the string value. So you can't do that like all inside the parentheses. I can't use this variable because even though this variable is a string, it's stored in this object called name. And so we do the beginning of the string, which is hello, comma, space. But then we need to exit out of the parentheses, or not parentheses, sorry, quotes, plus, and then the object name, plus, and then we can continue the string. So this will combine it all into one string when we go to output. So here we can just call greet user, and then this is where we need to pass in a string value. So we can create a string, and we'll do Bob, end our statement. So now we're calling two different methods here. And you know what? Let's do another one just to show that different input yields a different output. So we'll call this greet user method twice, once with Bob, once with Alice. We should see hello Bob, exclamation mark, and then hello Alice, exclamation mark. So you can call a method as many times as you want. It doesn't matter. You can call it with as many different inputs as you want, as long as the inputs are valid inputs. And this method only takes in one. It's a string. We're doing a string, but it's different values. So if we run again, we'll see three things printed. First, we're calling this greet method, so we'll see this statement printed. Then next, we're calling greet user twice with two different inputs. So let's go ahead and run. We've run. We see hello, welcome to the function world, hello Bob, and hello Alice. So next, what we're going to do is talk about return types. So I've said this phrase return types before, and so far all the methods we have in this class are void, meaning they don't return anything. You run it, it runs the lines inside of it, but then it doesn't return anything back to where it was called. One other note is, you see I don't have the word public here. We just have static void. So if you don't provide public, private, or protected, it just automatically sets it to a public method. So if you're writing a public method, you don't need to say that. It's just automatically inferred. If you want a private or protected method, though, you do need to provide that. So let's write another method. But in this case, method with return statement. So we're going to write a static int add numbers. We're going to take in two parameters, int a and int b. Okay, so now we see we're not writing void here anymore. We're writing int, meaning this method is going to return an integer object. So we're going to have to tell this method that it needs to return something, and you see we're getting an error here. If you hover over that, it says this method must return a result of type int. And quick fixes, we need to add a return statement or change return type to void. But we actually want to return something here, so instead we need to add a return statement, and that is done by using the keyword in Java called return. And you see it turned purple, it's picked up as a keyword. And then we've defined two inputs, two different integer values, a and b. So we're going to take those inputs and just add them together, a plus b. So this is returning the sum of the two integers that are input into this method. Now, how do you use this? So in this case, we need to declare a new variable of a type integer that will hold the value that is returned from this method. So we'll do int result equals add numbers 10, 5. So if you see here, we're calling add numbers, and we've provided two inputs because we've defined two integer inputs in our method. If I were to remove one of these, we'll get an error on the add numbers call saying it has two inputs, but is not applicable for an argument of just one integer input. Have to provide the parameters that are defined in the method. So here it's also saying this is a sonar thing, a code smell. The value of this is not used. We've assigned it to the object result, the result of this add numbers method with 10 and 5, but it's not being used anywhere. So we'll add just a quick system.out.print statement to print the result. Some result. I did a comma here when it should have been a plus sign. So now we're calling our other methods here, and we're also now calling our new method, which is returning something to us that then we can then use inside of our main method. So when I run this now, we see our hello, welcome to the function world, hello Bob, hello Alice, and now we see sum of 15 because this method we wrote down here added those two integers together with this integer math, which is just like normal addition, is adding two numbers together, the value in A and the value in B, which was 10 and 5, so we got 15. The last thing we're going to cover is something called method overloading. Method overloading means that you're taking multiple methods with the same name, but they're taking different input and providing different output or doing different operations based on that different input, even though the name is the same. So an easy example we can do that with is just another add method. So we have add numbers here. Save method overloading example static int, because everything about it except the return type needs to be the same. So sorry, not static int, static double add numbers. This time it's going to take in a double, two doubles as its parameters. So we see another error here, but it's because we don't have a return statement. But it can do the exact same thing because doubles are still numbers. They're just floating point numbers. They have decimal places, but you can still add them like you can a normal integer. So we can do return a plus b. So it's the exact same meat to the method, the same exact return a plus b. But the only difference is we're returning a different object type. That doesn't have to be the case. We can also return an int type here, and if we do some type conversion inside of the method. The main key difference here is the name's the same, what's happening in the method is the same, this return type could be the same, but the inputs are either a different quantity of inputs, so we could have 3 inputs. Let's actually do that. We'll do another one. And it's add numbers, but it's 3 numbers. But in this case, it's still 2 inputs, just like the other one, but they're a different type, meaning this is a different performance of the method, even though we're doing the same thing. So let's call it up here by saying double result 2 equals add numbers, and then we'll do 12.0 and 15.0. So these are double values. If I were to make this just an integer of 15, oh right, it actually works because that can be passed in as a double. Bad example, sorry. In this case, we're going to provide both of them as a double. We'll have result 2, and here we'll do some result 1, some result 2, and do result 2. So here, it's doing the same thing, but we're just providing a different type of input. So when we run, we see all the same statements as before, but now we have some result 2 is 27.0. And actually, let me move these back just for it to make sense, which is right. 12 plus 15 is 27. We keep that 0.0 though because this is a double type, and it always has to have at least one decimal place. If it's an even number or like an integer value, it still has to add. It has the 0.0. We'll run it again. Just that looks nicer without that space there. 15 and 27. Now, as I was mentioning before, we do the same thing with static int add numbers int a, int b, and int c, and then return a plus b c. And this is doing the exact same thing. We're using the same method name. It even has the same return type as this first one, an integer, but instead we're taking in 3 different integers instead of just 2. We're adding all 3 together and then returning the value. This will be another int. We'll do result 3 equals add numbers 5, 5, and 5. And we should see 15 again here. Actually, let me change that. I don't want 2 of them to have the same output. So 5, 55, and 5. So we should see 65. System result 3 plus result 3. So if we run now, we get all of the same output as above, but then that new result of 65 because we passed in 3 inputs, which means it recognized this method with this name with 3 integer inputs. Now if I were to come here and do like the string value 55, that is not an acceptable version of this method that exists in this class because it expects 3 integer inputs, but it sees an integer string an integer, which is, it can't do anything with that because there is not a method with that definition. So that's going to cover this episode of functions and methods. I hope that that was all clear and made sense. If not, if you have any questions, don't hesitate, comment down below. We'll get it sorted out. Now, as far as exercises for you to do to practice the topics that we've discussed in this episode, it's 2 very simple ones. One is a temperature converter. It's going to have 2 methods on top of the main method. So create your class like we have before with creating this main method, and just like in this class file, below the main method you'll create 2 separate methods. One that converts Celsius to Fahrenheit, and another for converting Fahrenheit to Celsius. Your input should probably be an integer or a double. It's up to you. And then you'll do the conversion. Just look up how you convert Celsius to Fahrenheit. Do that in the code, and then return that value out of the method to where it's called, and then allow the user to choose the conversion type and input the temperature. Another exercise you can try is just math operations. So in this program you'll have your main method, and then you'll have a method for each of these: addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Addition should be simple. We just went through that in this example, in this tutorial. So you should have addition down pat, and just do a very similar method for the other 3 operations: subtraction, multiplication, division. Allow the user to select which method to call, and then choose the operation to perform, or just define it in the main method. Call each of the methods you've created with whatever input you want, and just confirm that it's outputting the correct value that you would expect. As always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the episode, hit the like button, comment down below, subscribe so you don't miss the next episode.